The Whitmore mansion, with its centuries-old foundations, rested beneath a savannah sunset like a guardian of memories. The scent of jasmine wafting from the garden mingled with the faint smell of aged wood, making the air thick and nostalgic. Elara Whitmore, with delicate hands and a determined gaze, surveyed the house she had inherited with a mixture of pride and loneliness. It was here that the past clung to the walls and where the future was about to be put to the test. That morning, she had decided something many would call noble and others reckless. She would offer her ancestral home for the wedding of her brother, Silas, the family's beloved youngest. He had always been charming, and Cordelia, his bride, looked like something out of a society portrait, elegant, graceful, and almost dangerously radiant. "It will be beautiful, Elara," he had said, embracing her with practiced affection. As she walked the halls, Elara felt the weight of her decision. Every painting, every crystal chandelier seemed to watch her, assessing the wisdom of her choice. The mansion, silent, exuded secrets. The floor creaked beneath her footsteps, as if the house were whispering warnings only she could hear. Still, she smiled. She believed that family love was stronger than the past. Preparations began quickly. Decorators, florists, and musicians filled the once silent halls with laughter and haste. Elara, though exhausted, relished the vitality that had returned to the house. At times, she imagined that the Whitmore ancestors would approve, watching her proudly from the gilded portrait hanging over the fireplace. But not everyone seemed to share the same goodwill. Cordelia moved through the rooms with appraising eyes, touching the antique silverware and murmuring subtle comments about how things could be different with a modern twist. Elara politely pretended not to notice, but something inside her stirred. One afternoon, while inspecting the family study, Elara found a small compartment hidden behind the bookcase. Inside was a collection of letters and diaries yellowed with age. The elegant handwriting mentioned the name of Lillian Whitmore, an ancestor she barely knew. "For those who love this house with true soul," one letter read enigmatically. Elara ran her fingers over the pages, feeling the connection with the woman who wrote them. The words seemed to vibrate with a life of their own, as if they had been left there to be rediscovered at the right time. A shiver ran down her spine. She decided to keep them secret. Something told her these letters might be important.
As the days passed, Silas seemed increasingly distant, absorbed in the details of the wedding. Conversations between siblings became cold and formal. Still, Elara persisted in believing that the event would bring the family together again. "Nothing can go wrong under this roof," she repeated to herself. As night fell, she lit the candles in the great room and watched the light dance across the stained glass windows. The reflection created almost human shapes on the walls, shadows of a lineage that refused to fade. And for the first time, a thought crossed her like a premonition. Perhaps the house knew something she didn't yet. In the silence, the ancient clock chimed 9 times. The sound echoed like an ancient warning, reverberating even to the most distant rooms. Elara sighed and closed her eyes, unaware that on the other side of the house, Cordelia was watching through the half-open door with a smile that was not one of gratitude. Did you also feel the chill of this old house and want to discover what it still hides? Subscribe to the channel now and stay with me until the end of this story, because the Whitmore truth is just beginning. The sun was rising timidly as Elara descended the stairs for the first day of wedding rehearsals. The aroma of fresh coffee contrasted with the lingering unease she'd felt since the night before. The house felt different, more alive, denser. Each footstep echoed almost supernaturally, as if the hallways were whispering her name. In the garden, Silas and Cordelia oversaw the altar being set up. Cordelia wore a light dress, but her expression radiated something somber. "Did you sleep well, dear?" she asked with a cold smile. Elara simply nodded, feigning calm, though she sensed there was more to the question. During breakfast, Aunt Margaret tried to lighten the tension. She talked about family traditions, how the house had always been the scene of important celebrations. Silas, laughing, commented, "Maybe the next one will be my house too, who knows?" The comment, made in a light-hearted tone, made Elara's heart flutter. Hours later, while organizing her office books, Elara opened the secret compartment again. Lillian Whitmore's letters seemed to beckon her. She read passages about family feuds and the curse of blood and inheritance. The words echoed like a veiled warning. Whoever attempts to take what is not theirs will lose more than they wish to possess. The sound of footsteps interrupted her reading. Cordelia stood at the door with her eyes looking overly curious. "How interesting, Elara. Going through old family things?" she asked, feigning innocence. Elara quickly closed the diary, replying calmly, "Just reminiscing about our origins."
Later, during lunch, Silas told an anecdote about the old Whitmores and their eccentricities. His jocular tone seemed harmless, but with every word he implied that Elara had inherited more of her ancestors' volatile temperament than their art. The guests laughed politely, and Cordelia added, "But that's what makes her so unique." Elara kept her smile, but inside, something broke. She felt the weight of the words echoing more than the laughter. For the first time, she realized that perhaps marriage wasn't a gesture of unity, but the beginning of something carefully planned. At night, alone, she opened the letters again. One sentence stood out in the lamplight. "The house will recognize its true guardian when love is put to the test." The letter seemed to pulse on the paper. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the cold air rush through the open window. Outside, the wind blew through the trees in the garden, making a sound reminiscent of distant voices. The Whitmore house was awake and seemed ready to witness what was to come. The week leading up to the wedding brought more than guests and flowers. It brought an awkward silence amidst the smiles. Elara noticed that with each passing day, the family's gaze grew more curious, more inquisitive. At Friday dinner, as the sound of silverware echoed across the oak table, Silas began to tell childhood stories, but the memories he chose seemed carefully calculated. "Do you remember, Elara, when you said you heard voices in the house?" he asked, laughing. Laughter spread among the guests, even those who didn't know what he was talking about. Cordelia placed her hand on the groom's arm and added, "Old houses always mess with the heads of sensitive people." Elara froze for a moment, trying to maintain her composure. Aunt Margaret gave her a compassionate look, but said nothing. Dinner continued, but the air of lightness turned to ice. Every word seemed to have been placed on the table with the intention of discreetly wounding her. When Silas raised his glass and toasted to the Whitmore sanity, Elara stood, apologizing before the tears betrayed her. In the dark hallway, she rested her hand against the wall and took a deep breath. The distant sound of laughter seemed to mock her. Climbing the stairs, she decided to take refuge in her studio, the only space she still felt like her own. The silver she was polishing reflected her tired face, and the image looked older than the mirror could allow. That night, Elara dreamed of Lillian Whitmore again. In the dream, her ancestor stood before the fireplace with her diary in hand, saying, "The house speaks for itself, my dear. Beware of those who feign love." When she awoke, the diary was open on her desk, though she swore she had kept it. In the morning, he found Cordelia in the garden, talking to two guests. As he approached, he noticed they were speaking too softly, but he could hear the word treatment. When they noticed his presence, they both fell silent. Cordelia smiled. "Oh, we were just talking about how much you work too much. It's not good for you, dear."
Elara walked back home, her heart pounding. Elara was beginning to realize there was a subtle campaign against her, disguised as kindness and concern. The walls, once a refuge, now seemed complicit in the cruel plot that was unfolding. That night, sitting on the edge of her bed,
She opened one of the old letters. Lillian's handwriting read, "The enemy doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes he wears a face of blood." Elara felt short of breath for a moment. The house clock chimed again, 9 slow, low chimes. Outside, the moon was overcast, and in the darkness of the hallway, a door closed by itself. The wedding rehearsal dinner brought together all the Whitmore's close relatives, spread out over a lavish table lit by chandeliers. Laughter filled the room, but Elara felt her stomach churn. The atmosphere was charged with a tension only she seemed to sense. Halfway through the meal, Cordelia stood up with an envelope in her hands. "I found this among the family's old papers in the study," she announced, with the sweet tone of someone about to share a curiosity. Silas feigned surprise. The silence that followed was almost sacred. "It's a letter from Edmund Whitmore, your great-grandfather," she continued, carefully opening the paper. "He says here that he wished the house to always belong to the youngest son in the line, a tradition, he says, to preserve the family name." Murmurs rippled through the room. Elara froze. "That's a lie," she said, standing up. Her voice was firm, but her heart was racing. "I've reviewed all the wills. Edmund never wrote this." Cordelia arched her eyebrow, showing off the paper. "Then perhaps you should look again, dear. Memory sometimes plays tricks on us." Eyes turned to Elara, some filled with doubt, others with pity. Silas remained silent, watching her with an unreadable expression. Aunt Margaret lowered her eyes, unable to intervene. Elara felt her world spin. The house, the family, the legacy, everything seemed to crumble beneath the quiet laughter and venomous words. As dinner concluded, Cordelia approached her with a calculated smile. "Don't take it to heart, Elara. We all know how much this house means to you, but perhaps it's time to let it follow its natural family course, don't you think?" Elara didn't answer. She just watched her bride's eyes, cold as silver. Later in her room, she tried to find the fake letter. The envelope was gone. She searched the office, the studio, even the hallways. Nothing. As if the evidence had dissolved into thin air. And deep down, she knew who had taken it. Exhausted, she sat down in the armchair by the window. The moonlight illuminated the diary on her desk, and instinctively, she opened it. At the top of the next page, she read, "When the lie is told sweetly, the truth must roar." Elara closed her eyes. Downstairs, the rehearsal music blared, but inside the ancestral home, the real spectacle had just begun. The mansion, which had once throbbed with the energy of preparation, now seemed to breathe fear. The windows rattled in the damp savanna wind, and the distant sound of voices echoed through the hallways, even when Elara was alone. At night, the silence was no longer comforting. It was alive, watchful, observant. Every step she took seemed accompanied by another, invisible one. The days following dinner became a psychological torment. Silas seemed distant, always busy with guests and wedding plans. Cordelia, on the other hand, made a point of appearing overly attentive. "You must be exhausted, Elara. All this, it must be too much for someone so sensitive," she said softly, casting discreet glances at the others. Small things began to happen. The portrait of her parents, which always hung perfectly in the hall, was found fallen, the glass shattered. The old basement door, locked for decades, appeared ajar. And one night, Elara swore she heard a female voice calling her name from upstairs. When she went upstairs, the hallway was empty. One morning, one of the servants hesitantly commented, "Miss Whitmore, there are strange noises in the attic. like someone is walking around there. Elara tried to remain calm, but her fear was palpable. She went upstairs alone, carrying a lamp, and found only dust and cobwebs. However, beneath a loose floorboard, something was hidden. An antique brooch with the initials L.W. Elara carefully put the object away, feeling a shiver run through her. The symbol looked identical to the one Lillian Whitmore had described in the letters. It was a sign, a warning, or a protection. She couldn't decide. As she went downstairs, she heard Cordelia's soft voice in the hall, talking to one of her aunts. Poor Elara, she must be imagining things. Lonely people often hear what isn't there. The blood rushed to Elara's face. She wanted to confront her, but she held back. The mansion seemed more alive than ever, and more dangerous. That night, as she blew out the candles, she caught someone's reflection in the hallway mirror. She turned, but there was no one there. Only emptiness and the slow ticking of the ancient clock. Hours later, already in bed, Elara heard footsteps outside her room. Slowly, he got up and opened the door. The hallway was plunged into darkness. The wind made the curtains sway like ghosts. As she stepped forward, something whispered behind her. "They will take what is yours." Elara spun around, her heart pounding. The window was open, and the brooch she'd left on the dresser was gone.
The next morning, Cordelia came in smiling, holding the object. "I found this in the hallway. You must have dropped it." Her tone was gentle, but her gaze triumphant. And in that instant, Elara knew the war had begun. The next night brought rain. The sound of the storm mingled with the crackling of the fireplace as Elara read Lillian's diary for the umpteenth time. The pages spoke of betrayals, of siblings who turned against each other out of greed. "Love is the first to die when inheritance is disputed," read a sentence underlined in faded ink. The weight of family history weighed heavily on her shoulders. What was happening between her and Silas seemed to repeat the mistakes of the past, a silent curse that spanned generations. Thunder shook the windows, and for a moment Elara saw the reflection of a woman behind her. When she turned, no one was there. The next morning, Silas announced that he had hired a lawyer to review the estate documents. He said it was just a formality, but his tone was provocative. Elara questioned him, but he replied coldly, "It's the right thing to do, sis. After all, there are doubts about the legitimacy of the inheritance." Her world began to shatter. During lunch, Cordelia laughed, joking with the guests about how Elara had difficulty dealing with change. Aunt Margaret, for the first time, intervened. "Cordelia, enough. This house is older than all of us, and it belongs to those who love it, not those who covet it." The room fell silent. Cordelia blushed, but maintained her smile. Later, Elara went up to the attic again. She was determined to find more evidence of what Lillian had left behind. She rummaged through boxes, trunks, and fabrics until she found a folder sealed with ancient wax. Inside was a letter addressed to the future guardian. The letter outlined a secret clause in the original will. The house was to belong to the eldest woman in each generation who demonstrated dedication to the lineage. The discovery made her heart race. She finally had a concrete truth, one that could put an end to the lies. But the relief was short-lived. As she went downstairs, she noticed wet footprints in the hallway, and when she reached her office, the envelope was gone. Elara searched everywhere, desperate. The rain outside was picking up, and the wind blew like an ancient scream. In the reflection of the glass, for a brief moment, she saw that woman again, in the ancient dress, braided hair and eyes identical to her own, Lillian Whitmore.
Elara fell to her knees, tears mingling with the water pouring in through the open window. "I'm not crazy," she whispered. But the silent walls didn't respond. Only the distant echo of laughter from the hall confirmed that yes, someone was trying to convince them otherwise. 2 days later, a man in a dark suit appeared at the entrance to the Whitmore mansion. He introduced himself as Mr. Caldwell, a family lawyer sent at the request of certain interested parties. His posture was impeccable, but his cold, calculating eyes revealed he knew more than he was letting on. Elara welcomed him in the library, under the watchful eye of the ancestors' portraits. "I've been instructed to review Edmund Whitmore's will," he said, flipping through a leather folder. "There are documentary inconsistencies that could invalidate the transfer of ownership." Elara interrupted him, keeping her tone firm. "Inconsistencies created by whom?" The man just smiled. "I'm just following orders." When Silas walked in, feigning surprise, everything clicked. "You called a lawyer?" she asked in disbelief. "I just want to make sure everything's in order," he replied, looking away. Cordelia appeared close behind, placing her hand on her fiancé's shoulder. "It's just a precaution, Elara. You have nothing to fear, right?" After the meeting, Elara went upstairs to her studio, her heart pounding. Memories of Lillian's letters and the secret clause swirled through her mind like a compass without direction. With every second, she felt the house tighten around her, as if the very foundations bore witness to the injustice. That evening, Mr. Caldwell walked alone through the halls, examining documents and paintings with an interest that went beyond professional. Elara saw him stop before Lillian Whitmore's portrait and touch the glass reverently. "You believed in justice, didn't you?" he murmured, unaware that he was being observed. Later, Elara went looking for him again, but the lawyer had left, without saying goodbye, without leaving a trace. Only a letter left under her door. "They're erasing your history. Protect the evidence." No signature. Frightened, Elara locked the studio and put the Lillian diary in an antique safe, the key to which she hung on her necklace. Night fell heavily. Outside, the sound of cicadas was replaced by the distant howling of dogs. Cordelia, in her room, practiced smiles in front of the mirror. Silas slept, or pretended to. Upstairs, Elara blew out the candles, but the reflection of a man still lingered in the window. For a moment she thought she saw Mr. Caldwell outside, standing at the gate, watching the house as if waiting for a sign. When she blinked, he was gone. Dawn arrived with a thick mist covering the garden. Elara awoke to the sound of the grandfather clock chiming 10 times, slowly, drawn out. Her heart still racing, she went to the safe to check the diary. It was there, intact. She sat down and began reading again, determined to find something that might save her from the growing distrust. Between the pages, she found a passage she had never noticed before. The ink was different, as if it had been written in another era. "The true heir is the one who listens to the house. When the walls speak, listen. They will tell you who is worthy." The words seemed whispered, not written. The lamp flickered.
Suddenly, she heard a crack. The wall behind the desk felt hollow. With effort, Elara pushed aside one of the boards and revealed a hidden compartment. Inside was a small wooden box engraved with the same symbol as the brooch, the initials LW. Inside were folded documents and a blue silk ribbon. The contents were the proof she needed, the original clause of the will, written in Edmund Whitmore's own hand, guaranteeing inheritance rights to women who preserved the family legacy. There was the signature, authentic and indisputable. Tears of relief flowed before she realized it. But the moment of peace was brief. A sharp thud came from the door.
Someone was listening. "Who's there?" he shouted, rising to his feet. Silence. When he opened it, the hallway was empty, but on the floor, a white veil lay abandoned. Cordelia's veil. Later, over coffee, Cordelia watched her with a barely perceptible smile. "Did you sleep well, Elara?" "Perfectly," she replied, forcing calm. "And you?" "I dreamed about the house. She told me secrets." Elara swallowed. As the guests laughed and toasted, Elara knew she was being watched. She tucked the documents under the studio floorboards and locked the door. Lillian's diary felt heavier, as if each page held the pain of generations. And that night, as she drifted off to sleep, she heard a familiar voice, soft but urgent. "Don't trust the blood, trust the walls." She woke with her heart racing and the taste of iron in her mouth. The lamp had gone out, and on the bedroom wall, someone had written in dark ink, perhaps dried blood, a single sentence: "The heiress will be tested." The following days became a spiral of tension and vigilance. Elara barely slept, constantly worried that someone would discover where she hid the documents. The air in the mansion was heavy, and the wedding loomed like an omen. Cordelia seemed more confident than ever, radiant, draped in silk dresses and venomous smiles. One afternoon, Elara entered the main hall and found her talking with the priest who would perform the ceremony. "Silas told me about his sister's difficulties. She carries a lot, emotionally. It's sad to see someone so unstable." The priest's gaze was compassionate, but Elara felt fury rise in his face. Cordelia was laying the groundwork for her social destruction. That night, Elara realized Lillian's diary was no longer in the safe. Panic gripped him. He searched every corner of the study until he found the necklace. The chain was cut. Someone had entered his room while he was sleeping. Acting on instinct, he ran to Cordelia's room. The door was ajar. Inside, on the dressing table, the diary lay open. Cordelia appeared close behind, holding a glass of wine. "Looking for something?" she asked with cruel calm. "You shouldn't go through my things." Elara tried to snatch the diary away, but Cordelia pushed it away, smiling. "You don't understand, my dear. This house needs a new guardian, someone with sanity." The two stared at each other for long seconds, the sound of the storm raging outside. Cordelia moved closer, her face almost touching Elara's. "You're a single woman trying to keep a dead house alive. I'm just finishing what the story started." Then she tossed the diary into the fireplace. Elara screamed and ran, trying to save him. Flames licked the pages, but she managed to rescue part of the manuscript. Weeping, she blew out the smoke and pressed the charred pages to her chest. Cordelia, unapologetic, turned and left the room. As the smoke cleared, Elara noticed something new. Beneath the charred pages, a previously illegible sentence was now revealed by the heat. "Fire purifies truth." That rekindled her hope. Perhaps Lillian had even foreseen this. Determined, Elara began to restore the damaged pages. She stayed up all night, copying every legible word. But as she wrote, she felt a presence behind her, a cold breeze that moved the curtains, followed by a whisper, "Don't stop now." Startled, she turned, but she was alone. Only Lillian's portrait seemed to be watching her with lively eyes, almost smiling. The next morning, Elara was awakened by a knock on the door. It was Aunt Margaret, her face pale, but her eyes steady. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. In her hands was a sheaf of yellowed papers. "I should have told you sooner." They sat side by side, and the aunt revealed what she had kept for decades, copies of Lillian's original diary pages given to her by her father before he died. He knew that one day someone would try to rewrite the house's history. He told me to wait until the truth needed to be spoken. Elara could barely hold back her tears. The pages were intact, the handwriting unmistakable. Her aunt, with a sad smile, placed her hand over hers. "You are the true heir, my dear. Always have been, but you must prove it." As she read the passages, Elara discovered something even more profound. Lillian had left instructions for a symbolic ritual that would confirm the guardian's bond with the house, an oath before the portraits of the ancestors, sealed with the family's blood. When the new cycle begins, the house will choose its mistress, the text said. That afternoon, Elara prepared the great hall, guided by the ancient words. She lit the candles, opened the windows, and felt the wind swirl. Shadows moved on the walls, and the sound of ancient voices seemed to answer her call. "I am Elara Whitmore, and this house is mine by blood, love, and memory."
Thunder echoed, rattling the windows. When the sound died away, something fell from the ceiling. A small golden key, identical to the one on the office safe. The house had responded. Later, Aunt Margaret came in and saw the scene. "So she's accepted you," she murmured, moved. She handed him a blue ribbon she'd kept since she was young. "Lillian wore this around her neck when she first took possession of the house. Now it's your turn." Elara smiled for the first time in days. "Tomorrow, at the wedding, I'll tell you everything," she said. "They won't take what's mine." Her aunt simply nodded, looking at her tenderly. "Be careful, my girl. The truth sets you free, but it also destroys." As night fell, Elara locked herself in her office and placed the original copies in a folder. The storm raged outside, but inside the mansion, she felt the house breathing with her, alive, awake, and for the first time, on her side. The day before the wedding dawned with overcast skies and an electric charge in the air. The Whitmore mansion bustled with guests and preparations, but Elara felt the weight of a tense calm, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. In her room, on her desk, lay the restored pages of the diary, the proof of the truth. Lillian's necklace gleamed in the gray morning light. Elara spent hours rehearsing what she would say. The words needed to be strong, irrefutable, but also imbued with dignity. It wasn't enough to defend herself. She needed to reclaim her story before everyone. With each sentence she wrote, she remembered the voices of her ancestors and the promise she had made to her home, that she would never allow lies to replace memory. Meanwhile, Cordelia roamed the halls, overseeing every detail of the ceremony with almost theatrical perfection. "The Whitmore wedding will be remembered for generations," she told everyone, casting subtle glances at Elara, as if observing an opponent about to fall. Silas, nervous, avoided looking at her. That afternoon, Aunt Margaret entered the room carrying a small velvet package. "Keep this close to your heart," she said. Inside was a chain with the house's antique golden key. Lillian believed the true heir would only be recognized when she opened the safe at the right moment. Elara understood the meaning. The final proof must be revealed before everyone. As night fell, the mansion filled with music and laughter. The golden lights contrasted with the heaviness she felt in her chest.
From the top of the main staircase, Elara watched the guests dancing, the glasses clinking, the portraits of her ancestors reflecting the candle flames, as if the dead were watching too. Silas approached her, smiling falsely. "You look tense, sis. Is everything okay?" "Perfectly," she replied firmly. "Tomorrow will be a memorable day, Silas, for all of us." He hesitated, catching something in his sister's tone, but before he could respond, Cordelia called out to him, and he stepped away.
Later, Elara went down to her office, locked the door, and opened the safe with the key Margaret had given her. Inside was a letter that hadn't been there before. The paper was new, but the handwriting was identical to Lillian's. "The truth will come out when the house bears witness to love betrayed. Fear not, heiress, the blood and the stone are with you." The wind blew through the half-open windows, extinguishing the candles. Elara felt a shiver run down her spine. Tomorrow it would all end, or it would all begin. The big day arrived shrouded in clouds and omens. From early morning, the city bells echoed, and the mansion filled with voices, perfumes, and hurried footsteps. Cordelia, stunning in a pearly white gown, looked like a living painting, too perfect to be real. Elara watched from afar, dressed in black, a symbol of mourning and resistance. The guests settled beneath the grand crystal chandelier in the main hall. The impeccably arranged flowers hid the unease in the air. Silas, beside the priest, tried to appear calm, but his eyes betrayed anxiety. Aunt Margaret silently held the restored diary on her lap, protecting it like a reliquary. As the wedding march began, Cordelia descended the stairs beaming. But before the priest could begin the ceremony, Elara stood. The murmur that swept through the hall was like a sudden wind. "Before this union is sealed, there are truths that must be spoken," she declared, her firm voice reverberating off the ancient walls. Cordelia turned slowly, her smile fading. "Elara, please, not now." "Now is the only time," she replied. She walked to the center of the room and placed Lillian's diary, the original copies, and the letter from the safe on the table. "This house belongs to the Whitmore women by right and by love. It was the will of our ancestors, and you tried to erase it." Silas stepped forward, pale. "You're delusional." But Elara spread the pages before everyone, revealing the original signatures and the clause written by Edmund Whitmore himself. "Here's the truth, and here are the lies you've invented." The priest stepped back, confused. The guests whispered. Cordelia tried to intervene, saying the documents were forgeries, but contradicted herself by mentioning details that only someone who had tampered with them would know. The room fell silent. Aunt Margaret stood, her voice trembling but powerful. "I confirm. I saw these pages. They are genuine." Cordelia's face paled. Silas lowered his head in defeat. Elara took a deep breath, her hands trembling, but her soul at peace.
You wanted to call me crazy, but madness is betraying your own blood for greed.
Outside, thunder cracked. Rain began to fall, washing the mansion's windows as the truth echoed like a final judgment. Elara looked around and, for a moment, swore she saw Lillian at the foot of the stairs, smiling in approval. The Whitmore marriage was over before it had even begun, and with it, the reign of lies. The hall was plunged into silence. The sound of rain beating against the stained glass windows was the only music accompanying the falling of the masks. Elara stood in the center, her diary open before her like a sentence. Cordelia, motionless, tried to compose her smile, but her eyes betrayed panic. Silas, pale, stared at the floor, unable to meet his sister's gaze. "You planned all this?" Elara asked, her voice calm, almost a whisper. "Destroy my reputation? Take the home our ancestors protected?" Cordelia stepped forward. "I did what any woman would do. I fought for what my husband deserves." A murmur ran through the audience. "Your husband?" Elara replied coldly. "A man who betrayed his own flesh and blood?" The priest discreetly gathered his papers, realizing there would be no wedding. Aunt Margaret struggled to her feet and walked to the front. "The house has always belonged to those who honor it, not to those who desire it. Edmund wrote that with his own hand, and I witnessed it." The old woman's solemn tone echoed off the walls, commanding respect even from the most skeptical. Cordelia tried to protest, but Elara pulled a charred envelope from her pocket, the same one Cordelia had tried to destroy. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. The bride's face paled. "Interesting. Only the forger would know there was a wax mark under the seal." The audience reacted with astonishment. Cordelia mumbled something intelligible, but it was too late. Silas stepped forward, trying to defend his fiancée, but his words were weak. I only wanted what was fair, Elara." "Fair," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "Fair would have been for you to respect our parents' memory." He tried to move closer, but Aunt Margaret held up her hand. "Enough! The Whitmore name has bled enough because of greed." Outside, thunder roared like an ancient voice. One of the guests swore he saw the candle flames dance in the shape of female silhouettes, as if past generations were observing the judgment. Elara slammed the diary shut. "The truth has been spoken. The house has chosen." Cordelia dropped the goblet she was holding. The crystal shattered into 1,000 fragments on the floor. Silas, defeated, buried his face in his hands. And just as the mansion clock struck midnight, the doors to the drawing room banged open. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing half the candles.
No one dared speak. Elara looked up and saw, on the stairs, the spectral figure of Lillian Whitmore, serene, imposing, dressed in white. For a moment, fear gave way to reverence. The house had spoken. The appearance was brief, almost a breath. Some guests thought they had imagined it, others fled in panic. But Elara knew Lillian was there, sealing the traitor's fate. When the doors closed again, the hall seemed different, the air lighter, the shadows shorter. Cordelia trembled, clutching Silas's arm, who was no longer speaking. "You destroyed everything," Elara said, her voice firm but without hate. "And why? For a roof over your head? For pride?" Silas didn't answer. Cordelia tried to compose herself, but her face was as pale as marble. "This house, this damned house, has always preferred women." The words sounded like venom. Aunt Margaret approached Elara and placed a hand on her niece's shoulder. "Let them go. What their love will never understand is that this house never belonged to power. It belonged to devotion." Silas looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. "You don't understand, Elara. I've always been the shadow. I've always been the remnant." Elara watched him for a moment, then replied softly, "And it was that shadow you chose to embrace, not me." Silas lowered his head. Cordelia tugged at his arm, murmuring, "Let's go. There's nothing left for us here." The sound of their footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the rain swallowed them as they crossed the front door. The guests began to disperse, murmuring stories that would soon become legends. The priest departed in silence, and Aunt Margaret led Elara to the library. "Now it's your turn to decide what this house will be from now on," she said. "She's already proven her loyalty." Elara stood alone before the fireplace. The flames reflected off the restored diary, now resting on the table. For a moment she thought she heard Lillian's voice, soft, distant. "The burden is heavy, but love makes it light." She closed her eyes, allowing herself to cry for the first time in a long time. The next morning, Silas and Cordelia left Savannah. Rumors swirled that the wedding was never formalized and that Cordelia had disappeared months later. Silas never wrote again. The Whitmore name, however, remained with Elara, stronger than ever. On the mansion's porch, she watched the sunrise tinge the sky golden. For the first time, the house seemed to breathe peacefully. The walls no longer whispered pain, but gratitude. And as the wind moved the curtains, Elara murmured, "We're home, Lillian." Inside, the ancient clock chimed 12 times, like a new beginning. Months had passed since the fateful wedding that never happened. The Whitmore scandal spread through Savannah like a modern legend, and many avoided mentioning the family name aloud. But for Elara, the silence was a blessing. The house, once a symbol of strife and madness, now breathed a lightness. The windows were always open, the garden bloomed again, and the sound of life echoed through the hallways once again.
Elara transformed the mansion into something new, a studio and memory space, where art and history intermingled. The jewelry she created was inspired by the women of her lineage, delicate yet strong, beautiful yet scarred. People came from far and wide to see her pieces and hear the stories she told in a calm, steady voice, as if she had finally mastered her own destiny. Aunt Margaret spent her days sitting on the porch, wrapped in crocheted shawls, watching the sunset. "You brought the house back to life," she said proudly. "But remember, my girl, a Whitmore is never free of the past. She just learns to carry it." Elara smiled, kissing her forehead. "I know, Auntie, but now the past is a home, not a ghost." At night, when everyone had retired, Elara liked to walk the halls alone. The flickering candlelight reflected off the portraits of her ancestors, and she felt as if she were accompanied by a whole lineage of silent voices. At times, she could hear Lillian's soft whisper, "You were worthy, heiress. The house recognized you." One morning, while restoring one of the forgotten upstairs bedrooms, the restorers discovered a hollow panel behind an antique mirror. Curious, Elara opened the compartment and found a small wooden box. Inside was a carefully folded letter and a blue ribbon identical to the one she wore around her neck. The paper, intact despite the years, bore a new signature, Isadora Whitmore, 1887. The content was brief but disturbing. "The lineage does not end with me. Whoever inherits this house will also inherit the duty to protect what sleeps within. Blood holds secrets that have not yet been revealed." The handwriting was firm, almost defiant. Elara felt her heart race. The mansion still held stories she hadn't heard. She tucked the letter away thoughtfully, not as a burden, but as a promise. The Whitmore story wasn't over. It had merely begun a new cycle. The wind blew through the open windows, lifting the light veil of the curtains, and the scent of jasmine filled the air, the same scent she'd smelled the day it all began. Elara gazed at the golden Savannah skyline and whispered, "The house is mine, but the legacy belongs to all of us." Light streamed through the stained glass windows and illuminated the room as if the past and present had merged in a single instant. The ancient clock struck 12 times, ending the cycle, and for a brief moment, Elara swore she saw Lillian's shadow smiling on the staircase before disappearing softly into the morning light. The House of Whitmore has chosen its heir, and now it is you who choose the fate of the next stories. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come discover with me the secrets that family blood hasn't yet revealed.